Listen up. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Louisville Urban League's radio show and podcast. I hope you have had a wonderful week. Again, my name is Lyndon Pryor. I am the Interim President and CEO of the Louisville Urban League. Thank you for joining us this week. As always, you can find us on every Thursday when this podcast released from 12 to 12:30 on 101.9 WLLV FM or 1240 AM. Or you can find us at any time, wherever you get your favorite podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, rate us, review us, let us know what you think about it. Ladies and gentlemen, there has been a lot happening over the past week. Obviously, last week we had all of the fallout from the terrible and unfortunate shootings that took place. And this past weekend we had thunder, we had thunder over Louisville, which thankfully seemed to go off safely and smoothly for our city. But there is still a lot happening. And so I hope that we have found you this evening or this afternoon safe and well. Before we jump into the pod and today's very special guest, I do just want to lift up a couple of things, because given all that has happened over the last couple of weeks, I think it is easy for people to forget that there are a couple of really big things that are still happening in our city that we need to be paying attention to. One is that there is still a 90-page Department of Justice report that is sitting out there that accounts for lots of misconduct, misdeeds, and just poor behavior by our local police department. And we had started conversations around that report and what has been happening in the city, and the Department of Justice have been, or at least initiated, conversations with community, but those were put on hold following the shootings of a couple of weeks ago. And so we need to make sure that we are still paying attention to that we are still holding our elected officials accountable for that report, and that we are still making our voices heard around the things that are there. My understanding is the community conversations around the report will resume, I believe, this week or perhaps next week as we move into Derby. But please keep your eyes and ears open for those things, as we want to make sure that we are actively engaged in that work and making sure that we are presenting solutions for the problems that plague our local police department. Connected to that is the conversation around the police contracts between the city and the police union. My understanding there is that those conversations are scheduled to proceed either next week or the weeks following. I have not been able to confirm that completely, but I know that the time is short, as there is a deadline for the summer for those contract negotiations to begin. Again, this is another place that the league is going to continue to be diligent. We are still pushing for public participation, not just public input or public feedback, but we want spots on the mayor's negotiation team for impacted individuals and advocates to be present in that space to participate in those negotiations. And so where you can continue to lift up your voices, we want them to open it up. That has been the hashtag and slogan that we have been using, and we believe that that is imperative because all of these things are connected. The contract negotiations with FOP, the DOJ, consent decree conversations, and then ultimately when we talk about gun violence in our community and what we are going to do about those things, these are all issues that are absolutely connected and linked to one another, and we cannot treat them or afford to allow officials to treat them as somehow separate and unrelated entities. They all go together, and so we have to stay diligent and on top of all of those things every step of the way. And so the league is going to continue to do our part. You'll hear more from us if you aren't following us on social media, and we're going to continue to put things out as we hear them, but we want you all to do your part as well. And we know that there are other partners and friends around the city who are staying on top of this as well. And so please keep that in mind as we move forward and through the week. Now, turning from that episode slightly, I want to introduce and bring in our special guest this week, someone who is new to our podcast, but certainly not new to the league. She has been a member of the league team and served for a good long while. And then she left us to go and do some other great things around this city. But I am pleased and honored to welcome to the pod today, Miss Cassandra Webb. How are you, ma'am?
Hey, Lyndon. I'm doing okay. Okay. I was sharing earlier, I'm just trying to get settled into the week. My energy's a little low, but I'm doing okay.
Okay. Awesome. So, as I told you, this is calm. This is this safe space. We just rapping the way we do, and so we're gonna have a good time and just talk about all the things perhaps. And so this is gonna bounce all over the place. But one place that I usually like to start with folks is I like for people to be able to tell their own stories. So if you don't mind, just briefly giving the people the quick and dirty on who you are and how you've arrived at the space that you are in currently.
Cool. So I am a born and raised here, Louisvillian. I oftentimes tell folks that I feel like I grew up kind of in two different spaces or three different spaces of being in the world of growing up in suburbia. And I was just sharing earlier with the team here at the Urban League that I grew up and went to a Catholic school pre-K through 8th grade, and being one of very few Black students. But then I also have really strong roots in rural Kentucky. My family, my mom's side is from Campbellsville, Kentucky, and my grandma still resides there. And then my dad and the Webb side of the family really grew up in West Louisville. My dad, in particular, from Cotter Homes, which is now Park Duval. And so when I was growing up, I had a bit of all those three different spaces. And so I think that those helped build who I am today because they helped me understand and move about the world in a way that has been helpful in my career today. So I went to, everyone always asks that question in Louisville, what high school did you go to? I went to Millennial High School. And there I really felt like I was able to blossom and really understand the importance of having community, because also during that time, my teenage years, I was experiencing a lot of loss from a lot of family members. And I tell this story that I lost my father when I was 15, because that's when I knew I needed to build this sense of community, whether that was in school or outside of the school around me, because I really need support at that time. And so that really what has brought me into doing community work, with knowing very, very much at a young age that I needed to build community and that other young people also needed to have community folks, whether they were, actual family connections or they were friends or teachers or just other adults that really cared about them. And so I still carry that to this day of, I'm going to build villages and community around particularly Black youth. Our Black youth need us, and I'm going to continue to be a champion for Black youth, their families, and communities. And so I've been able to do that through the Urban League. Has worked here for 4 years under Mr. Richmond and Sadiqa Reynolds. And then I've also been able to work at youth shelters and work with a couple other community partners like Coalition Supporting Young Adults, or CSYA for short, Metro United Way. And then about 5 years ago, I landed at Cities United. And there I started working with young adults, 18 to 24, with building out a fellowship program so they could get better connected with their city, around creating violence prevention strategies and efforts that they were doing. And then a year into CEO, I transitioned to RPOP. And I've been hanging out with Russell, Place of Promise, or RPOP for short, for 4 years now.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about RPOP. And so tell the people, I mean, at this point, y'all are kind of an institution around here.
Okay.
And full disclosure, I was an advisory board member for RPOP, and so much love and affection for what has happened. But tell the people, what is RPOP and what have y'all been up to?
Yeah, so RPOP, or Russell, Place of Promise for short, follow us on social media. We are currently an initiative that's being incubated by Cities United and Louisville Metro government, as well as the Community Foundation of Louisville. And we're an initiative that's focusing on generating investments in the Russell neighborhood, but putting those investments in the hands of residents to make decisions about where those investments go and that they are the beneficiaries of those investments. And we want investment to come into the neighborhood, but we also want to make sure that displacement doesn't happen, that businesses and residents and other Black assets in the community that have long called Russell home don't get pushed out due to that influx of other investments coming in that may not have the best intentions for a community. And on Cities United side, we're really looking at the Place of Promise model as an opportunity to demonstrate if we have more community investments over the long term, we start to see a reduction in community violence.
And so how does that look for you all in a very practical sense? I mean, Russell is a huge community. And so this idea that residents should have a voice in what's coming in and how it's being used and all of that sort of stuff. In some sense, it's not necessarily a foreign concept when you think about, like, particularly suburban neighborhoods and things like HOAs, and that's kind of essentially how they work. But in a more urban area, and particularly one over time that has been disinvested in the way in which Russell and all the Western neighborhoods have, it's a little different because now you're not really talking about just, random developers showing up, but you're talking about government entities, corporations, large bodies of money, basically, and influence and power kind of descending upon communities and wanting to put upon those things for good and or bad reasons. And so how have you all begun to curate and galvanize community around this idea that they should be a part of it?
Yeah, so I think residents have been paying attention to there's things that are happening in their neighborhood that they're somewhat aware of and some that they're not. And they know things are happening and they're seeing buildings popping up. And Russell, the neighborhood's name, is more and more in the media. But they're still trying to sort it all out. So I see Russell Place of Promise, RPOP, as being a conduit of information and energy from the neighborhood and being able to share and sharing, giving awareness to residents about what's happening. Because I think that's the biggest thing, is awareness about who is making these investment projects, who's really leading these efforts. And then from awareness, it's how are these decisions being made and what part do they have, and power that they have in being able to influence those decisions. So whether it's from city government, are they aware of who their council members, metro council members are that represent the neighborhood, and do they have a relationship with them? Budgets are coming up. The mayor's about to present his budget, from what I've heard, on Thursday when this this podcast goes live. And so then it becomes a time over these next couple of months where Metro Council is going to be vetting that budget. And it's the time now for residents to be having conversations with Metro Council, with other representatives in city government, about what those decisions are being made about the Russell neighborhood. So I see RPOP as being folks that bring awareness, but also doing a lot of education. And we focus heavily on doing shared learning with residents. So as we're learning as a team of folks of now 6, that everything everything that we learn in our processes and how to navigate investors or how to navigate city government, we're then sharing that information with residents, and we're bringing them alongside with us to be a part of those conversations and those learning experiences. I could go on, but I'll stop right there. Yeah.
No. And so what I love about what our pop did and the way in which it happened, and it's twofold. It's one, the Cities United came in and essentially asked for permission, right, from residents to be able to do this work. 'Cause I think that is sometimes a question. It's like, well, who is Cities United? How you get there, right? Like, and I remember like that there was a process by which, how do we do this? And how do we get permission from residents to be able to do that? And residents have always been at the center and the focus of this. And kind of dovetailing on the last question, again, it's a lot of people and obviously a lot of different opinions, in terms of, people who believe that this should happen or that should happen. But there's also this competing interest of urgency, right? Like there's stuff that, there's stuff that is happening to the community and around the community that requires almost rapid response in some sense. But then there's also, things that people need, right? Like housing is an issue. Black home ownership is down and has been down for forever. Just housing insecurity in general for renters is an issue. And so these are urgent things. And so I wonder for you all, how have you managed and how do you try to manage or balance this somewhat time-consuming process of getting broad-based buy-in and feedback with the urgency of we really got to get stuff done like now?
Right. That's such a great question. And that's always something that plays in our heads about finding that balance between what can we slow down on and really make sure we are being patient and strategic and what things do need a reaction right now. And there's no easy answer to that. But where we have gotten to, and I appreciate you bringing up that our work is very much resident focused and resident centered. And that was the premise of the initiative launching back in 2018 was that, yes, there's a whole bunch of investment going on. You have Beecher Terrace redevelopment, you had the YMCA, you had the planned Urban League or Norton Sports and Learning Center coming. And so there was concerns being brought up from community leaders and from residents to say, we have to do something now to put this initiative in place that is going to curb displacement, but generate investments. And we want those to be at the those decisions being made by residents at the forefront. And finding that balance has been difficult, but what we do know is that building relationships with residents was key. So as we were building out our team, we wanted to make sure that we had residents a part of our team so that they would help us make sure that we were keeping resident voice at the center. We also wanted to make sure that we were doing some very intentional outreach efforts and using language that also, not just using the language, but walking and talking when it comes to partnership with residents. So very early on, we build resident leadership and engagement strategies, including like a leadership development course where we met virtually during COVID. Every other week, it felt like every week we met. We met, and it was about 40 of us, and we were talking about that awareness piece of what's going on in the neighborhood. How are we defining Black wealth for ourselves? How are we defining investment that's equitable? And from there, now we're on our third or fourth different resident cohort group, where those conversations now, we have collected a lot of information. They have informed our processes. And so we're taking those into the spaces where residents can't oftentimes be in. But we're also going back to them to say, hey, we're hearing about this. We're hearing about that. Can you can you give us your feedback? Like, what are your thoughts? What do you think about that? And residents are always ready to share their opinions and their thoughts. And so for us, going back to that question of like finding the balance of the urgency of now, and then being patient, what sometimes we have to get to is to say, this actually needs to slow down. Like who is making it urgent? Who is trying to speed up the process? Because inherently that oftentimes that's like that sense of urgency comes from white supremacy. Like, I'm going to speed up this process for you. So then you can't include all the community, that you can't include all these people's voices. And so sometimes we have the challenge, to say, why is this urgent right now? Why can't we slow down and make decisions? And then where we can't, slow down the process, it's from what we have heard from residents. We've built this relationship with them, and bring them in our decision-making processes. That's where it feels good to then make more of a urgent decision. And that has come up when it comes to the housing piece. Housing is huge. One of the things that we have been looking at since we started RPOP was the amount of vacant and abandoned properties in the neighborhood. When we originally started, it was about 230 some odd properties that sat in the land bank. Now, when we look at the maps, it's closer to 170 or so. And so when I'm talking to folks, they're often like, oh, that's great. Right? That's great. We have less vacant and abandoned properties. Well, on the face, it looks like that's great. But then my next immediate question is, who's purchasing those properties?
Where did they go? Right.
Where did they go? Who's owning them? What's their plan? How long are they going to sit on them? Right. Are they owned by people that live in the Russell neighborhood or Louisville or even Kentucky at all? Likelihood, no. And so when it comes to that, like looking at the amount of properties and how they are being acquired and who's acquiring them, it does create this urgency of like, if we don't stop and do something now, and we don't partner with other people, and we don't bring awareness to this issue, then we're not quite sure what the neighborhood will look like in 5 years or so. So it requires a lot of paying attention and being in consistent conversation with residents to make sure you're making the right decisions.
And I imagine that a good part of this for you all, like it is for the league, is also kind of education. Because when people see things like that, oh, well, the land bank had 200 some odd properties and now it has less. And, and I think you all are probably getting questions that sometimes the league gets around like, well, why aren't y'all going out and getting these properties? Why isn't this happening faster? Why aren't you just doing it? And it's like having to explain to people like, it's just not that simple. It is. There's so much in terms of policy, in terms of money,
liability, insurance.
Like, it's just, there are a lot of hurdles to being able to do this. And this is a big part of, the work of the path, is trying to figure out, and this is across the West End as well as other places in the city, of like, all right, how do we get our hands on this property and get it in the hands of developers who we know are going to do things, in an equitable fashion, right? Who are going to be looking out for those who need access to affordable housing the most and all of that. And so on the one hand, it's like we've got the people, the developers who can do this work and who are willing to do this work, but the process to get our hands on that property and actually take control of it, it's very expensive. It can take a very long time. And it's just hard, right?
It is. Yeah, it's really difficult. And so I've learned so much over these past 4 years. Like my background, so I went to the University of Louisville. My degree is in political science and dabbled in Pan-African studies and economics, right? So all those three fields were really important for me because I found them really interesting. But in this particular role, they kind of merged together to where been able to bring what I understand about economics and bring on also this experience of what I'm learning in real time into the work. And I've learned so much about just real estate. I've learned about, property ownership and that transfer of ownership and what it takes to really be able to get that done. And it's so much more complicated than I think people really understand. And that goes back to educating folks as we go along this process. So my responsibility is to educate my team, but it's also to educate the people that we interact with, whether that is residents or it's community partners that are also asking those same questions about, like, can you all move faster? And it's difficult. And so one of the things that when we originally launched Russell Place of Promise in 2018, part of the city's commitment for us as we were looking at the possibility of gentrification being sped up in the neighborhood was the city committed property to Russell Place of Promise for once we became our own standalone entity. And that commitment came with 75 vacant and abandoned lots. That would come from the land bank, as well as the 5-acre property that sits across from the Norton Sports and Learning Center. And so that was intentionally set in place because of those concerns around gentrification. And so that is one strategy that we implemented to say from the very beginning, we're going to make sure that we get city's commitment to say these properties will go in the hands of an entity that is Black-led, that is resident-centered, so they can make decisions about what happens to those properties. And we're in the process of determining that with residents now. But that had to do a lot of forward thinking back in 2018 to get us to 2023 now, to say that this may likely happen, and how do we preserve some property for folks?
Absolutely. So you mentioned the property at 30th and Madison, and that is kind of the big thing, right? Like y'all are doing a million things, but that is kind of one of the huge parts of what is to come out of this RPOP initiative. Can you talk a little bit about where things are with that property and kind of where things are going forward?
Yeah, so if folks remember the property back in 2018, it had a vacant warehouse. So it looked pretty scary. It was 220 square feet, and it had been vacant for about 10, 15 years. And in 2020, there was a large fire that you could see all the way from downtown. And so the building caught on fire as it was in the middle of emergency demolition from the city. There was a wall that could possibly collapse. So they were like, we got to tear it down. And so since 2020, it's been a gravel lot. The original plan for RPOP was that that particular building would go through renovations, and we would use some of the materials that were still there, but all of those were gone in the fire. And so since then, we have been in conversations with community members around what they desire for the site. We've done everything from pulling up with our cars with donuts and coffee and having conversations with residents to virtual meetings, to in-person meetings at our office around really reimagining that site. And what we have heard from community members is that they want to have businesses there. Black-owned businesses. They want the possibility of residential on that site. They want to be able to have activities for their families and for young people in particular, as well as elders. And so where we have gotten to after the many conversations we've had over these past 4 years is that they want the themes of community and family, which is inherent in the work that we do with RPOP, that those two things are really important. They also want entrepreneurship. So speaking to that business piece, they want thriving Black businesses in that space. They also want arts and culture. Russell was once known as the Harlem of the South, as a lot of folks say, a big hub for arts and entertainment. And so we want to be able to elevate that at that space. And we have a beautiful Black arts and culture scene in the community that is, I think, not getting the spotlight that it deserves. But it's great things happening, like Louisville this past weekend. And then the fourth theme is around wellness. They want to be able to see more healthcare, and it seems like in the area there's a lot going on. You got Norton Healthcare that's building a new hospital, and then you have Centerwell on the Sports and Learning Center site. But those are the four themes that folks have come up with, and so we've determined those themes. We've also had conversations with initial users for the particular site. Those will not be announced until May when we have our Place of Promise convening. So you all will not get the scoop today, but
I tried, y'all. I tried.
But those will be announced soon. We've also had a relationship with Perkins & Will. They're an international urban planning firm that have been doing work with us since 2019. They originally were doing pro bono, and now we have gotten to a very modest contracted services. Okay. But we have architects and urban planners from Chicago and Atlanta and North Carolina that are working on this project for us, and they have developed some concepts, some design concepts that are really beautiful to see. And so right now, where we're at is we want to begin to launch our capital campaign, because it's going to take a lot to build this thing out, and determining what our capital stack looks like, and all these terms that I did not know 3 years ago. Yes. And so when I say it's been a learning curve, it's really been a learning curve. But we are going to be launching our capital campaign later this year, and we want to make sure that before we break ground, that we're really in a good, sturdy financial space, and looking for investors that are in alignment with what our pop is trying to do.
Yeah. And I mean, I love that you mentioned like capital stack and terms and things like that, because I think it is important for people to hear, and sometimes for, residents and community members to understand, like, this stuff is more complicated. It's more complicated, to be completely 100. It's more complicated than we want it to be. Right?
Yes,
like it is,
way
like,
more.
Nobody asked for it to be this complicated. That's not something like, oh yeah, let's make it hard. Like, that's not the way we want it. But it is for all sorts of different reasons that are well beyond, in some sense, really beyond Louisville, beyond Kentucky. Like, it's just the way in which money has to move. And so I think sometimes when they see like, oh, so-and-so got this grant for this amount of money, they're like, why aren't y'all using that money to do X, Y, and Z? And it's
the
just
restrictions.
Like, there are restrictions on that dollar that
so many restrictions.
Everyone, that you just can't do what you want to do with it. And that is, I mean, it's important because I think as you all go through this process, there's going to be a lot of that, right? Not just at Madison Street, but the same is true in terms of building houses. Like, it is hard. Like, people will give you money, and in the press release will be like, oh, they gave you all this money for housing, but certain types of housing.
Certain types.
Right? And it's got to be built in a certain way or in a certain place or meet certain specifications. And so this stuff is a lot more complicated than, like I said, anybody wants it to be, but y'all are continuing to push through, just as the league and lots of other folks around the city are doing. But I think it is just something that we want people to understand, that none of this is as easy as it should be, but it's not. But that ain't for lack of trying, right?
It's not for a lack of trying at all. It's so layered, and there's so many. I feel like I'm a smart person and a lot of information, but the amount of classes I've had to sit in and like webinars to understand LIHTC credit, tax credits, how they're like only can be used at a certain period of time. And once one project has consumed all them, then you can't build another. It's mind blowing. It requires it is another career field. I mean, people base their careers off of being able to manage these types of development projects. And what I've learned increasingly more is particularly in the city of Louisville and the state of Kentucky, you rarely find people that look like you and I. Right. Rarely find Black folks in this space. And it's discouraging, right? Because you want to make sure that you're able to trust folks that are teaching you or trying to navigate you through the financial side of things. But it's hard to find that. And once you do find Black folks that are familiar with it, or people of color, period, they are hard to get involved into a project because they're overextended. They're overextended because they're working on so many other projects. And so one of the things that keeps reoccurring to me as I'm like going through this process is how we need to build a pipeline of Black folks that are in these fields that can navigate these systems and understand the finances behind development projects. Right. Because that is a sweet spot that is missing.
Yeah, and I mean it's not just. I mean there's so many people because we ain't even talking about the accountants, the lawyers,
No.
and all the other people who you have to have.
The owner's reps, I didn't even know that was a position.
Owners reps, the construction, like it's. I mean, all these people who charge by the hour.
Yeah.
Like so, like
Yeah.
when folks are seeing like, oh, they got a grant for X million dollars. Yeah, y'all need to understand a big chunk of that is going to these people who ain't gonna never drive a nail, ain't gonna never pick
All
up
the
a hammer.
consulting services that require, 200 plus an hour, 300 plus an hour.
Yeah. So it's a lot, y'all. And we probably could do a whole separate podcast just on that. And I think, maybe we will at some point because I think community gets frustrated in this, and you know this from working at the league, and I know you know this now at where you sit. Like, I think sometimes community folks get frustrated about like, how slow things are moving, or how money is getting spent or not being spent to do certain things particularly with regard to like big development projects. But there's so many pieces to this that it is very difficult to, like I said, nobody wants it to be this hard, and it just never can look exactly the way you want. And so that's why when projects do happen, like we be celebrating.
It's a celebration.
Because it's like, if you got anything built, like it is like, if you understood how hard it was to get that thing built, particularly in this community, in this environment, it is damn near a miracle.
It's so difficult.
Sometimes. And so we just, we got to stay there. But I feel that, and I know that, and I just like to lift that up because I know the work that you all are doing, and I know how hard, you all are trying to bring all of this stuff to fruition, and I know what it takes to get there. Now, on this, though, with our pop in general, you all are in the process of transition.
Yes. So we got a lot of things going on, Lyndon. So we just talked about 30th and Madison. That's one project alone. But we are in the midst of transitioning out of incubation. So I mentioned earlier, we're incubated by Cities United. That's where I sit in my team of folks that do outreach, and we do storytelling and communications. And then we also have a side that's with Louisville Metro Government. My co-lead, Teresa Zawacki, is on the LMG side, and then fiscally sponsored by Community Foundation of Louisville. So we get to borrow their 501c3 status. They handle our money. And so that's also something just in the process of like learning and like teaching folks about things. Like, what does fiscal sponsorship mean? It means it comes with a lot of layers of legal layers. It comes with layers around funding and accounting services. And so we are transitioning out of this incubation phase where we've really been getting the support from these 3 different entities and now becoming our own standalone entity. So we'll become a 501c3. By the end of this year. And hopefully, if things work out with our IRS determination paperwork, which now we've heard is taking 9 months to 12 months to get processed, hopefully June of next year, we will have that locked in. And so even building up a nonprofit is a lot. It takes accounting services. I need to follow up with our newly a newly obtained accounting service because tax season just wrapped up, and I know that they were busy, so need to follow up with them. We have legal consultants that are helping us put our incorporation paperwork together. We have gone through a process with residents where they were able to nominate 5 Russell residents to be a part of the founding board members. We're going to go with 5. And so they nominated, we went through a vetting process, they voted them in. And so now we have 5 founding board members, and we're going to have our first meeting today. And then we're going to go through the bylaws, go through the articles of incorporation and submit them by the end of May. And so that's a process in and of itself to make sure that we're developing this really sound structural organization that can have the capacity to take on 30th and Madison and have the capacity to take on more funds. So yeah, we're building that out and also building out an operating reserve in the midst of fundraising for 30th and Madison.
Right.
Because it takes a lot of money to run an organization that does so much.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, how are you feeling about this? Because I mean, I imagine in a sense, our pop has been your baby.
Yeah.
And you are now about to push your baby out the door.
Yeah. I'm actually really excited. I'm ready to see the child off to college. No, because thank you for acknowledging that. It has been a lot. It has been a lot. And it has been building something from the very beginning, like starting this initiative, which is something I enjoy. What I've also realized over the past few years, I love starting something new and putting my spin into it and working with the team to really build it up to get to a really healthy and substantial place. So when I'm thinking about my next, that's what I'm thinking about is like, how do I start from the ground up? But it has also, I've learned a lot. It's also been a lot of laughter and excitement and a lot of learning, but it's also been a lot of tears, struggling to get this work done. And so I think I'm at a place where I'm ready to step away. And we have put in a lot of work to make sure residents as well as community partners support our pop. And they wanted it to succeed. And so I think if we didn't have that, I would be a little bit more concerning of like, I don't know if I don't know if they're ready to go off to college. But I feel really confident right now with our founding board members, other residents that will not be a part of the board, but are excited to keep work moving forward. And our team, some of our team members that are going to be still continuing on with the project. So I feel in a good place.
Okay.
Yeah.
You scared a little bit?
I'm not going to lie. I'm scared a little, but more of, I'm scared of the things that none of us can control when it comes to the financial side of things. Like, talking to funders, it's
a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah. And let me, just for folks, listen, like I asked scared in no shade to the folks who are taking over and any of that, but it is, as somebody, and I believe Cassandra and I are probably similar in this, as somebody who at some level appreciates having my hand on something
and
being able to control some things, to just completely let it go.
Let me not diminish. Let me not diminish.
Like,
I do like to, I am the type of leader that I like to make sure things are done well and done right, right? Like, because ultimately it comes from a place of like, I feel like Black folks deserve quality.
Yes.
And we deserve the best of the best. And so that requires me and my team to be the best. And I get really disappointed when I look at some other projects or initiatives, and it's just like, I know they could do better and we could do better.
Right. Yes.
So yes, from a sense of like, I want to make sure that it continues to be, our pop continues to be a space where folks, when they see our pop's logo with a sweatshirt or on a flyer, it's like, that's a space where I feel welcomed, where there is a lot of really strong, compassionate Black folks or allies that are working towards this initiative, and that they're on top of it. Like what they say is what they do. The word is so important. Accountability is so important. And so I want to make sure that those values stay true. And also that we get to our ultimate goal when it comes to 30th and Madison, and then when it comes to making sure that Russell's, the people that have long called the neighborhood home can stay here and benefit from everything that's happening. I just want to make sure that big vision is accomplished. And so that's also lets me relieve some of my control a little bit at times of like, as long as everybody sees the big mission and like values are aligned, they may do it differently. And I may not always agree with how it gets done. But as long as those values around accountability and transparency and being mission and vision aligned are happening, then I'm good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That is a very evolved response, because I would say having now stepped into this role, me, Peggy is all the time, I'm just like, well, can I do this and this? And Peggy like, no. And I'm like, why? She like, that ain't your job no more. And I'm just, I'm just like, but I can't. She's like, no, it's not your job. You got to let it go. And so I get it. It's hard. And just wanted to ask how you doing that. And you seem to be doing much better than I am.
Well, I'll see over the next. So we have the rest of this year, and we have. I think we're contemplating what does the next 6 months look like of the first part of next year. What does that 6 months look like for my co-lead and I to support the transition of staff? And so I hope to get to the point to where folks are like, you need to back off, Cassandra, actually, because we got this. And then me, kind of really figure that whole thing out. But right now, talking to me in April 2023, I feel good. But we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Understood. Last thing on RPOP. So is the plan from a Cities United perspective, is the plan to take this and the success that this is and be able to say like, hey, we got a national model. Like, let's go and do this in communities around the country? Mm-hmm. Okay. It
is. And how that works with RPOP, we're still trying to really determine, because, one of the things that we see, that we know with Russell Place of Promise is that it needs to be financially viable. And there needs to be ways to make sure that we have income coming in that sustains it. And some of that looks like capacity building and technical assistance, providing that for other cities that are interested in the model. So for the Cities United side is that for Place of Promise, we have already been having conversations with cities about come and check out what's going on in the Russell neighborhood in Louisville. We hope to have some folks show up at our Place of Promise convening happening next month. But when we're having conversations with cities, and cities that particularly have a lot of cities that have these historically Black neighborhoods that have been disinvested in, they've had the impacts of redlining, urban renewal, a lot of similarities to Russell. They are saying like, wow, we need this to be in our cities. And so we have started those early conversations, but really are trying to look throughout this year and next year about what does that look like to take the POP model other places. But we do have folks that are really interested. And I think that this can be something that was created in Louisville that then is taken to other places that I think sometimes people miss about how different this model is around Black wealth building that's community minded. It's not individuals benefiting. It's some individuals, but it's really families in the whole community that's benefiting from investment happening. I think that's what makes this different, and the collaboration between the philanthropic community, city government, and community-based organizations.
Has there been a conversation about what this might either look like and or what the impact could be for other historically Black neighborhoods in Louisville? Like, I don't know that you would necessarily create a POP for, California, Shawnee or whatever. And maybe you have, I don't know. But have you all given any thought to what the impact could be for the other neighborhoods?
Yeah, so we've had people ask us if we're, willing to branch out to other neighborhoods, and they've said, they need it, whether that's residents or community leaders. And so I would say yes. We are interested in building relationships with particularly other West Louisville neighborhoods that want to adopt some of the strategies that we've been doing. Now, what that necessarily looks like, I don't know, but I'm open to conversation. If folks really want to talk through what does it take to do our home repairs project, where we were able to do $6,000 each for homeowners in the Russell neighborhood that were either elders or individuals with disabilities. What does it take? That takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of strategy to do that. But if someone is interested in doing that, let's sit down and talk about implementing that piece. Or if it comes down to our business accelerator that we partnered with other business business incubators like AMPed and other folks, like what does it take to do a business 101 to get folks like a friends and family style grant of $5,000? What does it take to do that to encourage business development in their neighborhood? I mean, we could sit down and have that conversation. So we're definitely open, but we know that it's going to take financial support. It is going to take support from political leaders also to make sure that those strategies that are being implemented in other neighborhoods are continue, and they're just not one-off, because we don't want to do anything that's just like 1 year. We want to make sure it continues.
Sustained, absolutely.
Yeah, sustained.
All right, so how much time were we at, Sharon?
We're at 50 minutes.
Okay, so we ain't got too much long, but and you can cut all this conversation out clearly. So transitioning to something, I told you we were going to talk about something random, and it's not. Well, it is random, but it's important, and it's just something that I've been thinking about. We've been having conversations about here at the league, and you were somebody who I thought, all right, who might be able to grant me a little bit of insight. No, it's nothing to be nervous about. So here's the thing, right? Like, so you are a young professional, in this city, and you are connected to others, right? Like there's, so I know some of your friend group and some of the other folks who are doing things, and one of there is, I believe, kind of an emerging trend around that age demographic. So we're really talking like 1835, somewhere in there, and maybe skewing a little younger. But in terms of folks who are really, I don't know if I would say that they're having difficulty. I think my vantage point is folks are starting to assert for themselves an ethic of care when it comes to finding work and careers that fulfill them. And so, like, there are a couple people who I won't necessarily name here, but who I've had conversation with, who you know well, who have said, like, you know, I'm going to work in this place for as long as it fulfills me, and then I'm gonna go find another job. Like, I'm not interested in hopping into kind of, quote unquote careers, the way in which, you know, our parents and grandparents would have done. So my question to you is, or the conversation that I wanted to have with you, at least briefly, is that kind of indicative of what you're seeing around in a lot of other folks in your peer group? And then what do you make of it?
So yes, it is what I'm seeing with folks. Like, I've had a lot of conversations with people about, you know, they want to stick in a particular position for maybe 2-3 years, or like 5 years is their max. And particularly in this space of doing community work, and I'm just going to say that because it's so broad, and that takes in all different facets. But yes, that is what I'm seeing. And how I feel about that is, one, I think it's, on one hand, I think it's good. A lot of different reasons I think it's good. Me personally, that's not necessarily the mindset I have, but I feel like I'm moving into, like, you know, 5-6 years and then transition to something else. And I think that's because, one, as I look at myself and other friends, it's like we're so talented and could be in a lot of different spaces that I feel like could benefit from our leadership and our voice and our work. And so, and I think it also helps to make sure things don't become monotonous, like you're doing the same thing every day, which is also something I've definitely learned about myself, that I could not go in and just have the same day every single day of the week. I would get bored, and I would.
Fair.
So it mixes some things up. And it also helps when you have that transition of, like, whether it's a 4 or 5 year period. For me, it also helps you better understand yourself. Like, it's helped me better understand myself, because I have different sets of responsibilities with a different group of people that I think if I was to stay at some place for 10 years, I don't know if I would have as much flexibility or be as dynamic as a leader that I am today if I had sat at some place for 10 years or more. And so I think that's great. I also, on the other hand, is being someone that now, like, supervises people.
Yeah.
Just folks,
Right.
I see the frustration in that, right? Like you build, you pour into like your team members, and you want them to be the best leaders that they possibly can be, and that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of dollars. Like if you're pouring into professional development, which I think all organizations, all businesses should be doing that, is pouring into professional development dollars, or either putting people in, if you don't have the budget for that, putting people in spaces where there's free opportunities or there's space on their calendar to be able to network with folks is super important. So I see, on the other hand, seeing the transition of like, I'm only going to be at one place for a year, only going to be at one place for 2 years. I'm like, yikes, like we were just getting to something really good.
Right.
And now I have to like, pour into somebody else, search for another person to be in that position. So I hear it on both sides, but I just resort to, I think it's a good thing because I think for the individual, I think it helps them learn and better understand themselves. I also think it helps the organization to stay fresh, because what has been one of my concerns about leadership, and particularly in like Louisville, is around succession planning, because I don't think that that's happening. And where we have folks that are in positions for 20 plus years, they may be amazing and great leaders and have led an organization or a business to a place that it may not have went to without their leadership. But I just sit back, and this is awesome with political positions,
Yes.
all types of positions, that folks are there for 20 plus years and they have no mentorship.
None.
Like there's no mentees, there's no one else that they're pouring into.
Right.
And then what happens when something happens to you, whether it's you're ready for retirement or
Or it just happens.
untimely, something happens, and then we are left with this gaping hole because there's not been this pipeline built out for someone to take on your position. And to me, if you really care about your position, you care about the entity that you're representing and that you're working for, to me, care means that you're doing some succession planning.
Yeah.
And it's not just you, yourself, that you care about, it's the organization as a whole.
Absolutely. Come on, poli sci. Look, because like this has been, and it's hard for me to have this conversation at the moment because I am not necessarily talking about where I sit in recent events. But I have long held, right, like just the idea that transitions kill organizations and have the potential to kill movements, right? And, and we go all the way back to major movements in history, right? Like not just the civil rights movement, but others, is that when folks were removed, and I say removed because in many of those cases, we had untimely departures of individuals, right? People were killed, taken out, gone to jail, et cetera, et cetera. Those movements suffer because there was not really a truly intentional strategic plan for how do we continue to move on without them. And as you mentioned, exactly in terms of political spheres, and we are seeing this right now at the national level, there's a certain senator who seems to be indisposed and is holding up progress on a lot of different issues. And that is, and it's hard. On the one hand, I think in some cases it's ego, right? Like, and there is, it is this unwillingness to let go of things, which kind of goes back to the whole thing, like you're transitioning out of art pop and all of that, like, people wanting to not let go of the reins. But I think the other point you bring up is, how are you preparing a pipeline of people, and not a singular person, but multiple people who could take your job and have the ability, the desire to take your job if and when the time becomes, because I think that is so critically important. And we can talk about this on lots of different levels, but I mean, for community organizations in particular, and I would even say this, back when I worked at a university and was working with students, I would tell them this all the time, like, y'all have done great this whole year. Have y'all talked about what's next? Have you talked about who's coming behind you? Because I got all these seniors leading these positions. Have y'all been preparing these folks to come in and take this job, or are they just gonna have to start over? Is that what you want? Like,
and that's, I mean, is that what folks want? And also, it's like there has to be some skepticism of the next generation that folks are holding when they're in that position. It's just like I don't know if it's an air of like, they just can't do it like me or whatever. But it's just like, oftentimes I want folks to shift to think that they may not do it like you. And they shouldn't, right? Like, because they should be their own selves. But also, like, you fumbled probably when you in your first few years of being in that position. And you have to allow people to make mistakes because it's the only way that they learn and grow. And I think there's some risk averseness that happens when you're in a position for 10, 20 plus years, that you are concerned about that next person taking over. And your mind doesn't even wander to like, how do I make sure that the folks that I'm bringing around me are prepared for that transition? And I think we do ourselves a disservice. Like, when I think about legacy, I think this is a generational thing. When I think about legacy, I want to make sure that when I walk away with RPOP, when I walk away from Cities United, that folks felt good when they were around me. They felt like they learned something, that there was some skill development. They felt like they understood how to build a culture that was beautifully Black and very empowering, and they felt like they were included in processes. And yes, I want all the other big things to happen. I want 30th and Madison to be up and running. I want all these other things to be up and running. But what I want people to walk away with is a better understanding of themselves, because I was able to support them in their next step, in their next phase. And so I think sometimes when we think about legacy building, especially like some older generations, it's very much monumental. Like, I want to leave this physical space different.
Right.
And that's great and that's beautiful. But I think there has to be a shifting on what we say is like our legacy that we build for folks. And if I can pour it into the next person that is leading Russell Place of Promise as the executive director, the co-executive director, or whatever of the organization, then that to me is just as important as leaving a building behind.
Absolutely. That is beautiful. And see, I told you it was random, but we got to a very beautiful place. And so I appreciate that so much, because it is a reality that I think we are experiencing, certainly here in this building, and thinking about, the multiple generations of employees that we have here at the Urban League, and how do we continue to build them and create a space that they want to stay, but that helps to fulfill a lot of what you're talking about, that gives them the diversity and in terms of assignment and opportunity, as well as, fulfills them internally and that sort of stuff. And so we want to continue to do that. But I also think that this is a word for employers out there who are very much in the need. And people will tell you the national narrative is like unemployment is way down, and it is in a sense, but those numbers can tell a different story depending on what you're looking at. But, for employers who are out there looking, I think there's a call to action that you have to change, that things need to look a little different, not a little different. They probably need to look a lot of different, in terms of the workforce that you're hoping to engage. And so we've got to do better. We as a society have to do better at adapting, because I think for so long, we've expected the incoming generations to just change and mold into whatever it was there.
And it's not going to happen.
And I think we now have generations of folks who say like, nah, I'm good.
I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to share a few things, because on the note of like just thinking about what I've had to do and how I've had to shift my leadership. So one of the things that I always try to do is make sure that one of my other team members is in a meeting with me. I'd invited a team member to come and join me during this taping of the podcast. She had a lot of stuff on her plate, so she wasn't able to join. But everywhere that I go, I try to make sure that there's another team member, whether it's a, fund development conversation or it's a conversation with media or whatever it is, I want to make sure that they're in the room with me, because one of the things that I have learned about myself is that I need to be around other folks to see how they talk and how they navigate a space, so I can pick up on what they do and adapt that for myself, or either just say, oh, I'm not going to really handle that situation in that way. I'm going to handle it like in the way that makes sense for Cassandra. And I think it also, whenever I am speaking, I try to make sure that there's also a team member that is also speaking with me and like at an event or something, or they're helping me prep for the conversation. So I'm like, I read off my speech. I'm like, does this sound good? Does this make sense? Right. What should I add? What shouldn't I? And doing those things in partnership with your team members help them better understand you as like your supervisor or the director or whatever, but they also help them build in a thinking and an understanding of, if I ever were to be in this role or adjacent to this role, what do I need to do to make sure that I'm good and prep for that? So it takes that's in a sense, I guess, mentorship, but to me, I look at it as partnership. I don't want to do things on my own. And I am better when my team is a part of that. So yes, employers thinking about how there's a lot more partnership in the relationships that you have with your team members.
Awesome. Such wise words, as I knew I would get. And so thank you for this time, Cassandra. Oh, let me do this last thing, because, yes, I do this particularly with all the Louisville natives that are here. I mean, I do it for with a lot of people, but particularly I like to ask folks as we depart, what is your hope for your city?
I travel a lot, and I get to. I mean, I'm just gonna put this like I get to do a lot of comparisons.
Humble flex, that's fine.
No, it's for work. But in my travels, something that I've observed is this tighter sense of community, and to go back to like this sense of doing some succession planning. I think my hope is that, from what I've observed and what I know Louisville needs, is that we pay attention to our young people, and not just like under the age of 18, but that 18 to 35-year-old age range, that we pay attention to them and we listen to them and we put them in places where they can develop stronger leadership skills. Because I think that they are our current leaders that we need right now, but they are the next generation as well. And so my greatest hope is that we pay attention to young Black folks, we listen to them, and we put them in a place to make decisions, and we support them once we put them there, and support in all different ways, from financial support to mentorship and guidance. And we allow them to make mistakes and grow from those mistakes. And so my greatest hope, I think the city of Louisville would be better if we listened and paid attention and supported Black young generation.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is Miss Cassandra Webb, who will be leading and running many things, I'm sure, here in the future. Cassandra, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your dedication to this city, to Black people, to progress. If no one has told you, you have made an impact. And you are making a difference. I know that I see it, and I felt it while you were here at the league. It was one of the greatest joys to be able to work with you in this space, but to see you going off and doing your thing other places has been just as remarkable, if not more so. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for joining us here on the podcast, and we will certainly have you back to talk about other great things as you move on to new and exciting endeavors. And ladies and gentlemen, that was Listen Up, the Louisville Urban League's radio show and podcast. Thank you all for joining us. Again, you can find us every Thursday from 12 to 12:30 on 101.9 FM WLLV or 12:40 AM, or find us anytime wherever wherever you get your favorite podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate us, review us, let us know what you think about the pod. Oh, and you can find us now on YouTube as well. Y'all check us out there. I hope and pray that you have a wonderfully blessed week. You all be safe. Peace.
Louisville Urban League's Kentuckiana Builds program is your introduction to the skills trades that lead to careers in construction, plumbing, electrical, carpentry, and HVAC. This 6-week hands-on and technical education program provides training for job seekers to earn 3 national credentials, JCTC credit, all while connecting employers with a qualified, skilled workforce. This innovative partnership is funded by Kentuckiana Works and the Kentucky Education and Workforce Development Cabinet. For more information, visit lul.org/jobs.
The Louisville Urban League wants to make sure that every student thrives academically, and to make that possible, the league is offering free intensive tutoring to JCPS students who qualify. Kindergarten through 12th grade students can receive expert help in reading, math, and ACT prep. Kids like me deserve every opportunity to succeed and to reach our greatest potential. Sign your student up today. To learn more, visit lul.org or call 502-585-4622.